All right, let's get right into it. For more than a decade, Canadian real estate was pretty much universally considered one of the safest, most lucrative investments you could find anywhere in the world. I mean, if you just looked out at the Vancouver or Toronto skylines, the story was obvious, right? Developers built, investors bought, banks financed the whole thing, and governments raked in billions in economic activity. Housing prices climbed year after year, and honestly, everyone, or at least seemingly everyone, was winning. But as we all know, every single boom eventually faces a reality check. What exactly happens when the market just stops going up? What happens when these massive projects that look like absolute gold mines suddenly become mathematically impossible to finish? Okay, let's dive into this, because this brings us to the multi-billion-dollar, high-stakes question at the absolute core of this explainer. When private investments fail, who should carry that burden? Is it the investors who willingly signed up for the risk, or is it the taxpayers who never even made the bet in the first place? To really understand how we got here, we've got to break down the actual mechanics of this market. Chapter 1. The Golden Years. So over the last decade or so, we saw this fundamental shift in Canadian society. The problem wasn't simply that homes were being built. The problem was that Canada's entire housing system increasingly rewarded rising prices, pure speculation, and massive leverage. A condo was no longer just a place for a family to live. It literally transformed. It became an asset. It became a financial product, a retirement strategy, and crucially, a speculative investment. The real question we have to ask ourselves here is, did Canada build a housing system designed to create homes, or one designed to endlessly inflate asset values? Moving on to Chapter 2, the foreign buyer debate. Now this is fascinating. Before the foreign buyer restrictions were put in place, the industry's stance was rock solid. They'd tell you foreign buyers are not the reason Canadians can't afford homes. The argument was always that lack of supply was the real issue, foreign buyers were just a drop in the bucket, and restricting them would ruin investment. But the second those restrictions were actually introduced, the conversation flipped entirely. Suddenly, some developers and industry groups started arguing that losing these buyers would crush sales, stall construction, and destroy market confidence. Which really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If foreign buyers were truly irrelevant, like they first claimed, why did taking them out of the market suddenly become this massive existential crisis? If foreign demand wasn't driving up prices, why did restricting it shake the industry to its core? It really forces us to ask, was the industry actually trying to protect Canadian affordability, or were they just defending a huge source of demand that kept those sky-high prices locked in? Chapter 3, the cheap money era. Picture the scene from roughly 2020 to early 2022. Interest rates were at rock bottom. Money was, practically speaking, free. Because of that, developers were paying absolute top dollar for land and launching these massive new projects, totally assuming that the insane demand would just never stop. And at the exact same time, investors were scooping up pre-construction units, banking on massive future payouts. The banks were more than happy to hand out the loans. But this entire machine was running on one incredibly risky assumption, that prices would just keep going up forever. Then reality hits. Late 2022 rolls around. Inflation rears its head. And by 2023, interest rates absolutely spike. So the crucial point is a harsh mathematical reality here. The exact same market forces that created all that immense wealth ended up creating the current crisis. Suddenly, a multi-million-dollar condo project that made total financial sense when borrowing cost 2% completely falls apart when it costs 6%. Literally, almost overnight, developers were hit with skyrocketing borrowing costs, plummeting sales, buyers walking away, and a totally shaken market. Chapter 4. The Bailout Question. It's the classic scenario: privatized profits, socialized losses. Think about it. During the boom years, all those massive profits went straight into private hands. Landowners made a killing, developers built up immense wealth. But now that we're in the bad years, the tune changes. The industry is suddenly looking around for government financing, taxpayer support, and public intervention just to keep their projects afloat. We have to look at this objectively and ask, if everyday taxpayers didn't get a cut of those massive profits during the boom, why on earth should they be asked to shoulder the losses during the bust? Chapter 5, the free market problem. Economists actually have a specific term for this dynamic, and it's absolutely vital to understand. It's called moral hazard. You see, a free market only functions if there are real consequences. If a company makes a terrible call, completely overestimates demand, or drowns themselves in debt, they are supposed to absorb that failure. That's the deal. But if the government constantly steps in to act as a safety net, the whole incentive structure gets warped.
The unwritten rule becomes, hey, go ahead and take massive risks, keep all the cash if you win, and just hand the belt to the government if you lose.
Chapter 6. The Canadian Homeowner Question.
Put yourself in the shoes of young couples, renters, and everyday families who are just staring at housing listings right now. They're looking at these industry bailout requests and thinking, wait a minute, where was my rescue when prices were shooting a million miles out of my reach? Where was the government support when I was just trying to get my foot in the door? It makes you wonder why multi-billion-dollar assistance might be on the table to protect corporate investments, but wasn't there to simply make actual homes affordable for regular families. It's a deeply resonant, totally rational question to ask.
Chapter 7. Who has access?
When government decisions are dealing with literally billions of dollars in private assets, how do we, the public, know our interests are actually coming first? Sure, governments absolutely need industry experts to explain the market. But when we look at these closed-door policy meetings, we really have to ask, who was actually in the room? Whose voices were the loudest? Were renters properly represented? Were first-time buyers sitting at that table? Or were developers and private investors severely overrepresented, shaping the very policies that might end up using your taxpayer funds to rescue their investments?
Chapter 8. Carney, Brookfield, and Perception.
Just to be super clear and completely impartial here, we are not pointing fingers or accusing anyone of actual wrongdoing. What we are exploring is systemic trust. When senior public figures who hold serious influence over policy also have current or past ties with massive investment firms, absolute transparency isn't just a nice bonus. It is literally mandatory. Why? Because public trust relies on avoiding even the appearance of a conflict of interest. Taxpayers need to know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the rules apply equally to everyone. Are the big guys getting a pass while small builders and everyday citizens struggle? Are taxpayers actually being protected when these high-level deals go down?
Which brings us to our final chapter, the real question.
As we've seen throughout this explainer, Canada's housing crisis isn't just about a shortage of wood, concrete, and land. At its core, it is a crisis of incentives. For years, the whole system was practically hardwired to reward runaway prices and wild speculation. A lot of people got very, very rich off that system. But the music stopped, the market turned, and the fundamental question every Canadian needs to grapple with right now is this. Should the government step in to protect investments that did brilliantly during the boom but fell apart during the bust? Or should the folks who gladly took the risk be forced to finally take the consequences? Because ultimately, it all boils down to this. If billions of dollars of wealth are hanging in the balance, the public deserves total, unwavering transparency. Are taxpayers actually getting sufficient protection in these backroom policy discussions? Or are we just being set up as the ultimate safety net for private corporate risk? Because if there is one absolute truth in the mechanics of the market, it's this. When a multi-billion-dollar bet goes south, that massive debt doesn't just magically disappear. Someone, eventually, has to pay the price. The only question left to answer is, who is it going to be?